Hey guys, it's Brandon here from SCULPT, and we are going to be talking about the second part in our series of how to. Oh fuck, I fucked it up. Jeez. Okay. Well, shit, I fucked it up again. I gotta piss. Use your words, Brandon. Just use them. Just talk. Why are you making it so hard? What are you even doing? You should just give up. You should quit. Stop doing this shit. Hey guys, it's Brandon here, coming to you for the second in the three-part series of how to make a mask. Today we're going to talk about proper mold making technique. Briefly, we're not going to go through the whole process just because it's a very long, continuous process. It's very tedious and very time consuming, and if I had to put up a video about how to properly go through a mold from start to finish, it would be hours long, and I'm not going to put anybody through that. Narration accompanied with photographs of the process. We're also going to talk about how to cast a mask when you're a finished mold. Hope you guys enjoy and buckle up. Have fun. Okay, so for some reason I wasn't able to recover the footage of me molding the Jester mask, so we're going to talk about it with this guy, which is another one of the masks that I recently finished up. You want to note that the first thing we do is we build a dam around the surface that we are going to be molding. This is a two-piece mold pictured, but the same idea applies for one-piece molds too. You just use water-based clay to build up a sort of wall around the area that you were going to be molding. And you do this to keep the plaster from, running all over the place. You want a nice clean edge that not only you will be able to grip very sturdily whenever you go to cast your mask after the mold is complete, but also one that will help you build up a nice decent thickness of the mold in general. And this is just done using my fingers and some water clay. All this is, again, super simple, super easy, and once we're done with that, we go ahead and spray the entire sculpture and the clay wall with a light coat of acrylic gloss like crystal clear or matte finish or dulling spray. Any of that stuff will work just fine. The idea is it just helps the clay, since it's a water-based clay, it helps the moisture release itself from the stone after the mold is complete. It just saves you a little bit of extra elbow grease on the cleanup time, that's all. But if you don't have that stuff laying around, you don't have to worry about it. You can still get this stuff out pretty easily because most clays nowadays have a pretty high wax content, or even a water-based clay just comes right out with a little bit of water and a toothbrush. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to start applying our plaster. You see I already have a coat applied here. It's also a good practice to keep some paper towels around the area that you're going to be molding in, just to keep any drops that may drip out of the mold area from getting all over the place. The way you mix your plaster, this is Ultra Cal 30. It's a gypsum cement. It's an industrial grade plaster. It's super hard, super strong stuff. Comes in a powder, and you mix it with water. You don't want to mix it too much. You don't want to mix too much up, especially for these first few coats. You just want to mix a little bit. And pretty much you mix it with the idea that you're going to be getting down into all those details. So you don't want it to be super thick. You want it to be kind of runny. Good consistency to shoot for whenever you're mixing is almost like melted ice cream or pancake batter, something like that. And so all you do is you just take a small brush or a chip brush and just very gently and very lightly brush the plaster onto the clay. Make sure that the surface is evenly coated with the plaster, that you don't have any areas of the sculpture showing through. You want to make sure you have nice even coverage. And don't be worried about using all the plaster you've mixed up either. If you mix too much, don't keep putting it on there. The idea at this point is to just get a nice even coat over the entire surface of the sculpture. And once that's done, stop and move on. Because if you put too much plaster over the top of this first initial detail coat, it will start to bead up and fall off because of the weight of the material. So you want to keep it nice and thin and just evenly coated. And as soon as you get enough on there to where everything's coated, just move on to the next layer. So here, this is the end of the following layer. You mixed up the same amount of plaster that you just did, the same consistency, almost like a melted ice cream or a pancake batter type consistency. And you do the same exact thing. You just use your brush and very lightly splash some over the surface of the coat that you just did. And you build up another layer like that. And you're going to do 3 overall detail layers like this. What that does is it builds up a nice, you can see how thick that plaster is on there. This is at the very end of my third coat. And you can see how it's filled in a lot of that detail. That lets me know that all that detail is accounted for in the inside of the mold. So I know that I can now move forward to start reinforcing my mold and building up a nice thickness that'll be able to withstand the force that you're going to put it under when you go to demold. So again, all we're doing is the same thing, just 3 times. We're going to do the one coat, let it dry just a little bit for just a minute or two. Second coat, let it dry for just a little bit, a minute or two, and then a third coat. And at the end of this third coat, this is when you start building up your reinforcement layer. Okay, this is the very end of our reinforcement layer. Now, some artists don't use anything to reinforce. They just go straight into a very thick paste-like mixture of plaster to start building up the thickness. Some artists use hemp. I prefer to use loose burlap. You can find burlap at any hardware store in the gardening section. It's pretty cheap. A whole 25-yard roll that'll last you a long time. For me, where I get it, it's only $12. So all you do is you cut it into little strips or little squares. Obviously, the size of those strips and squares are going to be dictated by the size of your sculpture and the size of the mold. So you build up those layers by taking those strips or squares of burlap, dipping them down into your plaster, and then applying them to the mold area, to the surface. And you just build nice, even layers of that plaster and the burlap. And you don't want to wring them out too much. You just want to keep them nice and saturated. This is going to be where most of the bulk of your mold comes from. And it's also worth noting that when you do this, you need to overlap all of those pieces as you put them on there. So one piece should overlap the next piece, etc., etc., etc. You can see now in this photo of that process as it's being completed, it all looks like one big surface, but that's actually dozens of little burlap squares and strips soaked in plaster and laid on top of one another so that they all become one uniform surface. And you do 3 layers of that, just like before with the detail coat. You're going to do 3 overlapping layers of burlap, and that's when you get to this nice thick standpoint. Now, I didn't have a photograph of the finished mold, but this is essentially the finished mold. This is essentially what the mold looks like after it's complete. I personally like to mix up a thicker batch of plaster almost to where it's like a paste, and I fill in all those little areas and rough patches just to make them nice and smooth so that whenever you go to handle the mold during the casting process, it's very easy on your hands. It doesn't, cut you or anything like that. And that's pretty much it. But for the most part, even if you didn't do that, you could still take this mold as is right there and still use it for its purpose. So you also like to have this mold set up by itself untouched. Once you're completed, let it set up for 20 to 35 minutes. The mold will start a chemical reaction. It'll get very hot and hard, and you know that the mold is ready to be pulled. Some people wait overnight. I typically don't. I just wait until I can use my fingernail to scratch the surface of the mold, and it no longer leaves a mark. That's how I know that the mold's done and ready to go. And so then you just carefully remove it. It's pretty simple. So you can see this is why I didn't do a video of the entire mold making process, because it takes hours, and it would just, my phone would have probably died, or my camera would have died, or something like that, and it just wouldn't have been a very fun video to watch. Not that this one is, in my opinion, a very fun video to watch, but it is a very necessary part of the process, and it's something that you guys have to know. You can't have one without the other. You could have the greatest sculptor in the world, but if they don't know how to make a mold, they're not going to be making masks anytime soon. So this is the most important step of the process, in my opinion. So that's that. We're going to move on to casting. Alright, so the first thing you're going to want to do for casting is take a small cup. Any cup will do, really. I'm using a small cup right here just because it's easier to manage, but if you have a bigger mold, you can use a larger cup. Either way, just kind of pouring the latex in there a little bit at a time, just enough to have enough in that mold to kind of slush it around and coat everything evenly. So that's what I'm doing right here. Also, I like to use my fingers to kind of brush in all of the detail in the mask. So, skin texture, cut lines, just anything that has nice detail. I use my finger to brush it in, because if you were to use a brush to do this, the bristles in the brush actually capture air, and you tend to end up with more air bubbles than if you were to just use your fingers and brush it in. So that's why I do this. It's just something that I've learned over the years, and it works very well. Keep a paper towel around to clean your hands up. But that's all I'm doing right here, is just pushing the material around, making sure you don't want to push too hard. You just want to, almost like you're applying, like just lotion or something like that. You don't want to push very firmly. You just want to kind of use your finger as a brush, so to speak. So you can see we've coated the inside of the mask out of the mold evenly, just brushing in a thin coat of latex. So now we're going to take a little bit more latex, add it in on top of that, and this is going to be our primary slush layer for this first coat. This is going to be where we build up our thickness. So you see I'm using a little bit more latex than I did before, and that's just because I want to have plenty of material in there to move around and to capture all of the detail and the thickness in all the areas where it needs to be. So all you do is you put that in, you slush it around. You can see how it's starting to slush around and coat the inside of the mask. I like to carry the latex up to well past the cut line of the actual mold. We do this because as latex cures and vulcanizes, it shrinks about between 15 and 20%, depending on the batch of latex, where it comes from, what it's cut with, stuff like that. And once it cures, if it pulls away, as it shrinks, it'll pull away from any of the smoother surfaces of the mold, and if you'll end up with a gap between the actual finished mask and the mold itself, which is good and fine as long as you have a decent thickness. But if you don't have a decent thickness and you want to do another layer, having that gap in between the two surfaces makes it very difficult to do without ruining the mask. So I carry it up past the lip around the entire ridge of the outside of the mold, just so if it does pull away, I'm good to go. And you can see right there, I am just dumping it back. Just dump it, shake it a little bit, make sure you get all the excess stuff out. Kind of just hold it there in place for a while. Always scrape the sides of your mold like that, see, just like this, because that's still usable material down there. You don't want to put that right back into your bucket. That's material that you don't have to worry about having to waste. So using my breath to disperse any air bubbles, and you can see I still have a little bit in there. That's fine. I'm going to blow out the rest of these air bubbles real fast and let this mask, I like to set it upside down onto the top of the bucket, and I do that and let it drain a little bit, just like that. So, hey guys, so it's the next day and our mask is done, and I went ahead and pulled it from the mold. So all we have to do now is essentially trim it and get ready to start painting. I do want to know I didn't film this part, but see, that's a nice thick mask. I know it looks a little transparent because of the harsh lighting, but it's not thin in the slightest. And this is just what the 3-coat method that we did yesterday does. So, we always make sure to remember to powder the back of the mask, just to keep the latex from sticking to itself when we go to demold it. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this guy up, and we'll get ready to go. Okay, so here we have the mask, nice and trimmed. Again, you can see it's a great thickness. It's very, very nice. It's very uniform all the way around. I've taken my Dremel and I've sanded down the cut around the eyes to make it very comfortable, so that when you wear it, it's a tight-fitting mask, and so when you wear it, it's not going to be poking you in the eyelid or anything weird, And everything is very nice and uniform. It's a great pull. And, if you want to see any of the methods that I use for trimming masks, I didn't just go ahead and record that in this video. But if you go over to my channel, which will be linked in the description, I do have a very in-depth tutorial on how to properly trim and seam a latex mask. So, cool.